Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Eluge the Shoreless Sea. This is a mono blue spellslinger that wants to be bracket 4 competitive. The deck builder, Shoreless, says that they're not very familiar with the archetype of a blue spellslinger deck, and they're hoping they made a good choice with the commander, and they're looking for some assistance on what they may have missed on making this bracket 4. And because of the nature of that question, and because of the nature on the deck, we're gonna probably talk a little bit about what makes a bracket 4 deck viable, what makes it competitive amongst other bracket 4 decks, and what needs to change or what needs to be optimized for that to happen. Some of these are going to be a little more boring topics for a lot of people because there is in essence that answer of play more game changers because you can play as many as you want, so why not play more? But I think there's also fundamentally this idea about finding your space in a meta and evaluating your game plan on a critical level, right? Like being honest with what the game plan is and how functional that's going to be. But this is among a bunch of other things I want to bring up. So before we get all into that, let's take a look at our commander and see what they do. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Eluge the Shoreless Sea and why are they our mono blue spellslinger commander? Now, Eluge is a really interesting one. This is one of those elementals from, what is it called? Bloomburrow, right? Yeah, Bloomburrow, where they're just normal sized creatures in a world where everything's tiny, which I thought was really, really cool and flavorful. And this one's built to be very much so centered around the occasional flood mechanic that blue gets. It's usually akin to kind of like Blood Moon or other effects that will force lands to be islands. This one is very specifically, it is an island in addition to its other types, so it's not exactly a Blood Moon. We can't hurt our opponent's lands with it, but we can give them a land so that we can island walk, for example, something a lot of blue cards used to have. Here we have a 4-mana elemental fish with 3 blue pips in it. So this is a very blue card. Their power and toughness is equal to the number of islands you control, which ideally will be the number of lands one way or another, because whenever Eluge enters or attacks, you put a flood counter on target land. It is an island in addition to its other types as long as there is a flood counter on it. Then the second and most important ability is the first instant or sorcery spell that you cast each turn costs blue or 1 less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter. Now this is fundamentally a very interesting thing that this card gets to do, because traditionally reductions in mana cost are only in the colorless or the neutral mana, right? It's very rare to get that reduction to do the colored mana, and it's even rarer for it to do both. Eluge stands here and says, hey, I can completely reduce instants and sorceries completely to nothing. There's also a really strong element of Eluge where it doesn't reset the flood counters when Eluge leaves play. This is something we've seen before. So by not doing that, Eluge just gets stronger and stronger as the turn cycles pass. As every time you cast them, you start off right where you left as long as, your lands haven't been destroyed or anything like that. And though I will say at bracket 4, land destruction is no longer something people are afraid of, so it is possible to lose your lands, traditionally it is less likely that your lands are going to be destroyed. Instead, most likely they'll try to keep your commander off the battlefield. So looking at the deck, I want to start off by doing the little check-in that we always do of a few things that I think every commander deck needs to be critical about. This is land count, this is curve, this is mana rocks, and mana production. Not in that order though. Let's start about everything with lands. We are looking at a deck with 34 lands, 35 including MDFC. And this is not ideal. This is not ideal for a number of reasons. But before we even go to the specific ones, we can scroll down here and we can see that despite being a mono blue deck, only about 54% of our deck, our lands produce blue mana, which is crazy to me. But when we start looking through it, we understand it almost immediately. Cards like Ancient Tomb, a very good, strong card, which we'll return to in a moment, only produces colorless. We've got a bunch of colorless spells. We've got Bonder's Enclave. We've got Demolition Field. We've got Fountain Port. We've got that taps for blue. I'll count that. I also do wonder if things that tap for a colorless, can tap for a color count in that search and mox field. I'll never know. Maze of Ith also does not tap for any mana. Moving a bit lower, Nesting Grounds does not tap for colored mana. Nykthos does not naturally tap for colored mana. Reliquary Tower, no colored mana. Rogue's Passage, Scavenger Grounds, Talon Gates, Temple of the False God, we'll get back to it. Brain Generator, Urza's Cave, War Room. This is a lot. This is a lot of cards that don't tap for blue. And it gets worse because the cards that tap for 2 colorless, Ancient Tomb and Temple of the False God, well, they can't be naturally used to cast our commander the first time. Because the first time we cast our commander, there is only 1 colorless source in their mana. So Ancient Tomb is just wastes on that. A waste that hits you for 2, especially worse if you can't use that mana for anywhere else. So kind of wasted to have Ancient Tomb as one of your spells. So don't get me wrong, Ancient Tomb gets a lot of use in the rest of the deck, but it's still worth noting of one of our few lands. Then we look at Temple of the False God, and you cannot play this card in 34 lands. This is so heartbreaking to me. I know there's been like a lot of the bigger name content creators have been hard on this card, and I know that like I want to be the plucky underdog. I want to tell you, listen, I'm here for you. I'm going to tell you this is a card you can play. But I can't in good conscience. Temple of the False God is not a good card. It is only good when you can generally ramp so aggressively that the 2 mana it produces is basically meaningless. So don't get me wrong, especially at lower budget and lower power, when we're talking about ramp decks, it can be played, but not at this power level. This power level, it's not really going to work. And so then if we take, for example, Temple of the False God, we cross it off because it's probably not going to tap for mana. Then we grab Maze of Ith and we cross it off because it's probably not going to tap for mana. Well, now we're at 33 lands, right? We're at 33 lands. If we're getting even more critical and we're looking at cards like Nykthos that just do not tap for the way we want it to tap, we're cutting down even further till we have a pretty high chance of getting only colorless mana, like a really high, like we're not even playing Command Tower. Don't get me wrong, don't play Command Tower, just play an island. But it's something to note, right? In our deck that naturally needs to hit 3 blue mana sources by turn 4, almost half of our lands do not tap for blue. This is a disastrous problem, if you ask me, because this deck is going to have a really, really hard time getting off the ground. And if your opponents are just a little smart, and maybe, let's say, a little cruel to focus out your commander out of the game, you're probably done. There's probably not much you can do, because if you draw into the wrong half of your deck, where you get a lot of your higher CMC spells, we get into a situation where it's just not going to work. Likewise, talking very briefly about mana rocks, we are very low on mana rocks, and we're not even playing Soul Ring. I believe that is a deck building choice, but I think it is worth noting that, you know, I'm really hard on mana rocks. This deck needs mana rocks really, really badly, because if you draw into an inconsistent amount of mana or inconsistent half of your deck, not being able to cast your spells puts you really, really far behind, because this deck needs to chain its spells in a reasonable manner in order to get ahead. It is, in essence, a combo deck that builds a slow inevitability through the game, right? Not being able to cast our spells is going to be the way we generally lose the game. So that's not great. Looking at our curve isn't bad. Our curve plays like a lot of decks that are trying to cheat cards into play, which we are. In essence, we are looking at a lot of these spells like Time Stretch, and we're saying we'd like to be in a position where we're paying maybe 4 mana for this by cutting off like 6 with flood tokens. And I think that, or other reducers, maybe less, maybe in the end game we want to cast this for free. And I think that's very reasonable. So the curve looks as expected. At this power level, I would like more cards in the 1 mana slot, but 2 isn't bad, so I don't feel particularly about that. 3 and 4 are a little higher than I would like, but once we get into 5s and beyond, we are just in payoff mode, and I do expect it to look like that. So that's not as much of a problem. All right, let's talk about fundamentally what the plan and position of a deck like this is. So I've talked about kind of the core of it in terms of the baseline, the backbone of any commander deck. We've looked at the lands, we've looked at how it gets its colors and what it does with it, with the curve. Now let's look at what the deck actually wants to do. This is very clearly a all-in on take extra turns kind of win. This is the kind of strategy that I believe sometimes gets shamed out of lower brackets or lower powered decks. Maybe it's not the case anymore, but I used to hear a lot of frustration among commander players about the mono blue deck who just takes 30 turns in a row and everyone's stuck sitting around waiting for it to end. So just to be clear, if you're playing bracket 4, if you are a prospective mono blue player, a mono blue enjoyer, right, and you want to take as many extra turns as possible, and you're worried about that kind of sentiment, once you hit bracket 4, I really want to guarantee nobody cares. Like, I don't mind. We're playing at a very high level. You're trying to win. If fundamentally you're going to beat me after 8 extra turns, that's fine. Like, as long as you can explain to us how you're going to win, I'm probably pretty happy to concede and move on to the next game. Especially when you're threatening to, you know, cast these take another turn spells for free over and over due to your commander, right? Meanwhile, attacking with an unblockable, actually I don't think they're unblockable. Yes, just a very large creature that you have methods of giving unblockability or other unblockable creatures, right? And at that point, I'm pretty happy, like I'm pretty sure that you can just let your opponents concede, and that's not even including a number of really strong combos that we have access to. We've got the Peregrine Drake Deadeye Navigator combo, where this is infinite blue mana, which will just win you the game instantly with this deck. We've got a nice lock with Jin Cataxius to drop Jin Cataxius and just say, hey, this is going to really, really slow down your ability to interact with me or to develop boards, and in the meantime, I'm going to win. Hullbreaker Horror can just resolve and stay on the battlefield that way. So we have a lot of really, really good things to kind of like finish the game. What I am concerned of is what we do up to it, right? This is what I was alluding to at the start of the video when I was saying when we're playing at this level of competitive power, we need to be thinking about where our deck, like where in the play pattern of this pod we're in, our deck is going to fit, right? I think traditionally, especially newer or less experienced players, I guess that's the same thing, but we'll think of this in commander talk, right? Like you have a fast commander, you're the fast commander. You have a slow commander, you're the control player. You have a combo commander, blah, 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 right? At this level, you should be thinking about your deck as a whole and not just commander, but you need to look around and see where you fit in, right? Because combo decks, for example, in bracket 4 are much faster than they are in a number of different brackets, right? Like all the previous ones, because you have access to tutors, you have access to unlimited tutors, you have access to game changers. Like this is the level that someone is very, very happy to go like Enlightened Tutor into Smothering Tithe and just generate a ton of mana to try to go off the next turn. Like that's something that does happen. Now, without as much fast mana, it is trickier. It's not CDH levels, but it's pretty close. And so we have to expect like how do we fit in here? And what we have here, like I said before, is kind of a slow building combo deck that presents a sense of inevitability that threatens their opponents that like, hey, if you leave me alone right now or for long enough, I'm going to eventually win the game. This is fine and good. I think the problem that I'm seeing in this deck list is that it fundamentally struggles with interaction And it struggles with the argument because, you know, after you make this clear, your opponents are going to say, so why should we leave you alone? This deck doesn't have very good defenses. It doesn't have any board clears. It doesn't have any propaganda effects. It doesn't have any punishment for people going all in, no Aetherize or anything like that, right? No fogs, nothing. So, and most of our creatures, no offense to them, are not really suited for combat. Even our commander doesn't start off particularly big due to the nature of our deck and the number of islands we play, right? Less so if we fix up the mana, but even then, if it comes in as a 4/4, like it's competing with much stronger commanders and much stronger creatures. So the question becomes like, what's going to convince the aggro player not to attack us? Like aggro has gotten really, really strong over the last few years in Commander, and we need to be able to convince people, hey, back off. Now, there's a number of ways to do that, and I'm not going to like give huge suggestions on what to do. Better counter magic, more removal, actually maybe even some removal is where we should start off with. So like Pongify and Rapid Hybridization, maybe some stacks effects, maybe propaganda effects for sure I think are particularly good here. Maybe even touches of group hug to incentivize our opponents not to attack us, like Kami of the Crescent Moon, for example, to increase draws across the board and have people focus on each other instead of you. These are all options, but I'm going to suggest we need to pick one of them and we need to get behind it, because at this point, this deck feels like it desperately doesn't want anyone to interact with. Like, this is a deck that looks at everyone in the room and goes, please do not interact with me. I'll cry a little bit if you do. Which is not a problem if it was 2 to 3 turns faster. So that's kind of the place that we've slotted ourselves in. This is Spellslinger, but it's more like a combo Spellslinger, where it wants to have a series of very powerful turns to win. Okay, let's talk about a few cards that jump out at me, or card types that jump out at me that I think we need a little bit of work in. Now, looking at artifacts is the first place I want to talk about, where I don't mind that we have Wayfarer's Bauble. I do like that here. Arcane Signet's good. But then immediately after we get into kind of an equipment phase, which I really don't think belongs here. Fundamentally, our deck does not benefit from Shroud in the same way that other decks do, especially in bracket 4. In bracket 4 and beyond, people are going to kill your commander if they need to. The ability to put Lightning Greaves on it just does not hold water in the same way as it does in like bracket 3 and 2, right? Your opponents are well equipped to deal with that. They play Vindicate, Beast Within, they play Stroke of Midnight, or just plain Artifact Destruction to deal with it, right? They want to stop that. And so if they need to, they will either work together or work with their own capabilities, and they will get your commander on board. Now, this isn't a problem because you're going to aim to recast your commander. It's part of what the deck does. And in addition to that, like part of the reason we're not playing Lightning Greaves here is that we want to use cards like Essence Flux as a secondary defense mechanism to kind of bounce them out of play, into play, get another flood counter, keep going. However, this just leads me to say, why don't we play more of those effects? I know the answer. The answer is because in blue, they're not very strong, but you know, we still get options of like Slip Out the Back and other things that can be protecting our commander without having to play what I'm going to say is particularly subpar cards for this deck. And the thing is, with the other artifacts that we have, right, like a nice Ward 4, I do like this. This is basically hexproof, but it's still the same thing. But we have these hexproof cards, and then we have a series of swords that's here to kind of accelerate. Sword of Hearth and Home, I think, is the strongest because both effects are really powerful in this deck. And the protection from green and white is particularly good when you're not using green, you're not using white to block your own creatures. So I do like this one, and I like that it fits on any of your creatures, but I just don't really see you attacking with these creatures, right? A lot of them are kind of clumsy, unfortunately, right? They are blue creatures that are there to maintain like their effects as static abilities. Either they're straight up reductions in mana, in like mana cost, or they give you card draw, or they give you tokens, or they exile, or so on and so forth, or they're copies of your commander. A lot of these are just not really meant to be attackers. They're not even meant to be blockers. Like Baral comes out early, and you do not want to have to block with this thing, because if someone's attacking into you, they're attacking with a 3/3. You also do not want to put a sword on this thing, because once you attack, your opponents are probably going to kill it. Now, this is not 100% true, because one opponent just might not have blockers, but in essence, playing Baral, playing the sword, then equipping him, and then attacking and keeping Baral is a lot of work with very little payoff. I would rather just the mana raw. Like, we're working really hard for something this deck is just plain not meant to do. So in the artifact zone, I'm feeling a bit of weaknesses there. In sorceries and instants look really, really good. I think there are some arguments that cards like Sublime Epiphany might be leaning too much into the theme of the deck and being a little too cute, because there's going to be just a lot of times that this is not castable. But I leave that up to you to decide. I think in essence, a game changer, let's say one that counters spells for free when your commander's out, is probably much better than it, and doesn't require that same problem of having to jump through hoops to get a reactive spell. Because remember, this is a lot of work for a card that's not good when you have everything you need to make it good, right? Like, you'd rather this be Nexus of Fate, you'd rather this be Beacon of Tomorrows, a number of other cards. You'd rather just be winning rather than having this reactive spell. So this is the kind of spell that I think is not good at any point in the game in your game plan. Sorceries, like I said, these look really good. I do like the sorceries. I think we are playing maybe too many of these duplication spells, because I do feel like they're intended to hit our commander, and I feel like there is a point that you don't want this anymore. Don't get me wrong, we do have other creatures that it is nice to get copies of, but none of them have what I would call a tremendously powerful ETB. And the ones that are really, really good with a non-legendary copy, such as Jin Cataxius, I would suggest is probably still win more, because, well, so you cast Jin Cataxius, next turn you cast the Vile Duplication, you now have 3 copies of Jin Cataxius, which, by the way, this second ability doesn't stack, so that doesn't get better, but that first ability gets really, really ridiculous. So every time you get 3 copies of a spell, I think you were already winning. I don't really think you need to copy this. So it leads to this kind of situation where I'm like, oh, this is like I get where you're going with this here, but I don't know if I would play this many copies of it, right? I think where's our 4-mana copy creature? Spark Double is probably good enough in this scenario, and we don't need others. I do feel that playing a few more cantrips could be nice here. I do feel that with our land count, and even if we increase our land count, having access to a few more cards that allow us to look at the top few of our deck, whether this be, surveying, scrying, what have you, can still be really, really helpful to ensure hitting our land drops in the early game, to do something with our first flood counter when we have nothing proactive to play with it. And I will say, for what it's worth, being able to filter out lands later in the game when you're trying to go off is also going to be rather important. So all of these aspects I think are particularly good. Obviously Brainstorm would be better, but we're not playing any fetches. Maybe we should be at this power level, so that is something to consider. Looking at our creatures, the ones I kind of am suspicious of are the ones that seem to be just a little too cute. So Valley Floodcaller, Flash is kind of really important in this deck, and these next 2 cards kind of embody my problem. The Valley Floodcaller is a 3-mana card whose entire purpose is to give your creatures flash. Don't get me wrong, if you chain enough spells, this creature becomes pretty big. But that's not the game plan. It's just +1/+1. It's not going to be meaningful. You could be attacking with a 12/12, but you'd rather be attacking with a 80/80. This isn't the same thing, right? It also doesn't have evasion. So we're really casting this 3-mana card to give flash to everything. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's terrible. But then we look at the card that goes along with it, Wave Break Hippocamp. Wave Break Hippocamp says whenever you cast your first spell during your opponent's turn, you draw a card. This is a huge payoff for casting a lot of instant spells. A payoff we're already somewhat encouraging with Eluge, who says the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs this much less. So we can just have a free spell on our opponent's turn and get to draw an additional card off of it. However, we are at 13 instants. 13 instants, many of which are 4 mana or above, so we're not always going to be able to use flood counters even with our commander to pay for the cost. Not including the ones that are unwind or rewind, which are very strong here, however, are dependent on our opponents casting a spell that we want to target to get the payoff there. Really high payoff, don't get me wrong, but still something worth considering. We need a target to capsize. We need to make an effort to Blue Sun Zenith or Drown in Dreams. 13 instants isn't very high, which brings us back to the same idea. We're like, oh, this is why we need Valley Flood Column. Because if we don't have Flash, we're really, really far behind. So with that in mind, I'm not going to make a hard and fast rule, but I'm going to suggest that either we need more Flash, which will probably make the deck weaker, or we need more instant cards. And I really do feel like it's the latter. I think we just need to extend this section by 5 or 6 cards that will cull from the creatures. And that if that means losing Wave Break Hippocamp, I think you gotta do it. Because once again, this is kind of a win more card. We have so few instants in the deck that we need to kind of have Flash out. And if we have Flash given to all of our spells, we need our commander out. And if we have our commander out and we have this Flash thing and we have Wave Break and we're casting things, well, we're already really far ahead and it becomes win more. Maybe that's a bit of a harsh statement on the Hippocamp, but it is a structural problem that I see here. We're kind of dependent on things going our way. And once again, we're dependent on our opponents not interacting with us. Looking at a few other creatures, I would say a Sad Robot, Solemn Simulacrum absolutely needs to go. This is something I bring up a lot, where we need to be cheating this creature into play, either reanimating it, reducing its cost, casting it multiple times, or blinking it. And you might be like, well, Cursed, we do have the means to blink it. And I would say, yes, but is this the card you really want to blink? You want to be holding up Essence Flux for your commander. You want to hold up Teferi's Time Twist or the Planar Incision for your commander. We only have so many blink cards. We need this to be used appropriately on our commander as both a protection spell and a proactive mana reduction spell, right? And I think that just makes a really big difference. That when we're using it on Solemn Simulacrum, something has to go wrong for that, right? Most likely we just want this to die, and blinking it doesn't get us to draw cards. So we don't want to blink it. We don't want to play it is the problem. This is just kind of something from bracket 3 and probably now I would say bracket 2 that has made its way into this deck that unfortunately needs to be excised. Looking at our higher mana cards, we have a few here that I don't feel as confident about. Jin Cataxius is a very, very strong card, but I think is kind of a difficult one to work. I don't know for sure. I can see this being very strong here, but I also want to suggest there is a chance that this is not very good here, because both clauses of keeping Jin Cataxius, which don't get me wrong, I don't think people are rushing to kill Jin Cataxius. He's not very threatening, but having the 7 cards in your hand and then activating this and not having him removed and having that 4 mana is a lot to ask for. Don't get me wrong, the Great Synthesis is really, really good, and I think wins you the game. I recognize that Shieldred is a card I talk about that wins you games, and the Great Synthesis is not that far from winning the game. However, what Shieldred has that Jin Cataxius doesn't is an ETB. An ETB that is very, very powerful into a flip that I would argue is worth the 4 mana. because we can only activate this as a sorcery in a deck that wants to be at instant speed, we need a lot going for us to cast it. And I think, fundamentally, that it could work. I'm just having a hard time believing, and I wanted to point that out. Coming into the last few creatures, we have Nezahal. Nezahal feels a little out of place here. Don't get me wrong, I do understand why it's really strong here. I do understand that it represents a lot of power if you can get to that mana, but we cannot cheat it into play. And I think that is the biggest problem here, right? We would really like to cheat this in play, even if it's going to evaporate at the end of the turn. Being able to discard it to bring it back permanently right after is really nice. However, this is a lot. Not only do we need a lot of cards in hand, something this deck does kind of struggle with card draw until it gets going, but we then have a creature that is blockable that doesn't really follow the plan of the rest of the deck. Like, we can say, hey, well, once we have our infinite combo going, this is a really good attacker, but once we have our infinite combo going, you could attack with anything, right? You're just going to slowly build up a board in a hand that will either bounce all of... You're probably just going to use the Great Synthesis, is I guess the answer I should be saying. You're going to dig into the Great Synthesis and use it to bounce all your opponent's creatures away, replay your commander, and then just get ahead that way, continuing to loop, take another turn spells, and attacking your opponents. So Nezahal kind of stands out as like an inclusion for a higher mana cost deck, or a deck that wants to cheat this out. A friend of mine plays an Elder Kindred deck, and I think it does very well there because there's a lot of ways to cheat into play. Likewise, Scourge of the Fleets feels profoundly confusing because I do understand I understand the perk of this. Don't get me wrong. I understand how this can be really good. But this is a 7 mana card that you need to hardcast in a deck that needs islands to function. You have 9 islands in the deck. So in order for this to be good, you need your commander to have been doing its job as well. So once again, we've got a card that's just meant to bounce a bunch of creatures, which I'm sure exists in more reasonable ways, that needs your commander to have been working, and fundamentally you need to have done everything you can to get to 7 mana and have nothing else to cast. So I don't know, like, I would rather just be playing a board wipe or a board bounce in blue than play this creature. It could be an instant or sorcery. You know how you love those. Eluge loves those. Imagine casting a series like instant speed, return all creatures to your hand for 0 mana because Eluge has been putting flood counters, right? Or even better, you get to put Eluge back in your hand. I guess this isn't an or. When you cast it, Eluge goes back in your hand and you get to cast Eluge for 4 again instead of having to cast them for like 6 or 8. Okay. I've gone through a lot of this. The last card I want to talk about very briefly is Aqueous Form. I understand that Aqueous Form can be very useful in certain scenarios, but I feel like that use is outstripped by how bad of a card this is. I think fundamentally, if you wanted this unblockability, there's a lot of other cards that would do this job a lot better, and this is definitely not it. I think this is a very clumsy card. I'd rather almost anything over this, and by the time it's good, I feel like you're already winning the games. I think that is a cut. All right, let's talk about the cards I would like to add. I would like to add Harbinger of the Seas. The idea is that Harbinger of the Seas is so playable at this point in the game, in this bracket. In bracket 4, Harbinger of the Seas is immensely powerful and can shut down games for, not ever usually, but for a pretty long time. And that is the exact time you need in order to get your combo going. It also very notably turns your lands into islands. And I'm not saying this solves the land problem. I think we really do need to play more islands, but it does in an elegant way get us there in addition to playing more islands. It fixes our mana, it lets us cast our commander, it buys us time, and then it gets us into a situation where we can then win the game. I think This is a card you want to play as much as you can, and you want to protect almost as hard as your commander, because if your opponents are really deep into multiple colors, and they have been very greedy about their basics, Harbinger of the Seas can just buy you quite a bit of time. Now, they're all going to start attacking you, because that's probably what's going to happen, but once again, as I said earlier, if we can make some exchanges to give us a little bit of protection from that, we'll be in a really good position. I think this is pretty easily the most important addition. If you are at bracket 4, please play Blood Moon effects. You need to win games, and this is the kind of thing that wins games. Moving on, we've got Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. This is very specifically a card I really like at the current status of the deck. This may not always be the case, but at the moment we're very low on countermeasure. And we have a lot of spells that are very strong that we want to recast without a lot of ways to return them to hand from the graveyard. Lear is a really nice solution to both. If you can resolve Lear, your spells are no longer getting countered, but also you can start flashing instant spells from your graveyard. I think the curve of playing your commander, casting a reasonable 1-drop like, let's just say Ponder for the sake of it, or Preordain or anything from your hand, then next turn casting Lear, attacking, and then casting a 2-mana spell for free, let's say once again another instant 2-mana spell, going to your opponent's turn, immediately recasting one of those, like your sorcery, I guess it has to be your instant, but recasting your instants from the graveyard and just getting a little further ahead in value right away is really, really nice. Now they've got 2 cards they need to deal with, and Lear is probably the one they want to deal with more than your commander, which is neat. It takes a little pressure off, and it is really good at that point in the game. In the late part of the game, obviously this allows you to recast your Take Another Turn spells, and at that point, you just win, right? You just flat out win the game, because now you don't even need to dig as far for your extra take an extra turn spells. What a mess blue is, and I love it. Something else that I thought was very notably missing was High Tide. I feel like I understand this isn't fundamentally the same kind of thing, because High Tide decks try to do different things, but I mean, we're in mono blue, we're probably going to have a lot of islands. High Tide's here to reward us for that investment. And even in, like, I'm going to say middling games, it can take you from like 7 mana to what I think reasonably about 12 to 15, depending on how many islands that you have. Does that even make sense? That doesn't make sense. Say 8 from 7 mana to like 9 to 11. Let's say that. But regardless, that's a really big boost that can help you multicast or set up extra turn spells or get ahead in a way that is really useful when your commander is not on the battlefield. So I think that is a nice addition. Likewise, Sapphire Medallion feels very out of place that it's missing. I think this is a really, really good card. This is the exact kind of deck I want to see it be played in. It solves a lot of problems with the amount of creatures that we're playing without playing a lot of ways to reduce their costs. It works with, I think, basically every card in our deck outside of artifacts, so that's really, really nice, and is a soft reduction of a little bit of mana off your commander, which I do like. Something I meant to say earlier about supporting the idea of mana rocks in this deck is the fact that we would really, really like our commander to come down on turn 3, and a 2-mana mana rock allows us to do that, but Sapphire Medallion also lets us to do that. Do note that means we need 3 blue by turn 3, which once again comes back to playing more islands. Just an instant spell that I felt was kind of missing. We're not really using our graveyard, so a delve spell here and there can't hurt. You could also put Treasure Cruise here if you'd like, but Dig Through Time feels particularly missing here. I think it's just a very, very strong card, and that you can really pay for it early. Like you can kind of use those flood counters really effectively with this, because you're reducing it with flood counters for the 2 blue, and if you have 6 cards in graveyard, that's amazing. You've just paid this for free, right? And if you don't have the full cost, you're still paying very little for a card like this once you put all of the flood counters and everything together. I would argue this is like one of the strongest thing our commander does is by reducing the blue pips in a spell instead of just the colorless pips, it makes Del very, very powerful. So maybe in a different build in a different place, but in this one, at least Dig Through Time, maybe Treasure Cruise. Here is counter spells. I think I literally just looked up counter spells and looked by EDH rank. Yeah, and I think you need to play more of these. I recognize there's a few that we are playing. There's at least one that's a game changer down here, but I do think we need to be playing more. I think the importance of your deck being able to stop your opponents from basically doing anything or stopping you from winning is going to be really, really important. And obviously you can't counter everything, but like you need to counter something, whether it be removal against your own cards, board wipes when they're not helpful to you, or just their own game changers. You need to be doing something. You can't just hope your opponents don't interact with you. Sometimes you need to be the one to say, hey, I'm going to be in charge of this interaction, and say, no, it's not going to happen. Obviously, things like Arcane Denial are usually the most accessible, but we are in mono blue, so we could play actual factory counterspell. But of course, depending on what you're looking for, it gets, there's a lot of variety, especially because once again, we have access to game changers. There's a lot of fun things we can do. Speaking of game changers, this is probably the last note that I'm gonna end the video on because we've gone on for a while, but we are in bracket 4. You do need to be playing more of these. We are playing Expropriate, and I believe we're playing Ancient Tomb. However, we should play more. We get to play more. If we're at this level of competitiveness, we need to kind of take advantage of the things that we have access to. Our opponents are expected to not be frustrated or salty about having these cards play against them. We also are expected to be, you know, either playing with proxy or committing to the budget that is required at this power level, right? Cyclonic Rift is a feels bad card when you take out, you know, a bunch of really new players, but at this level, it is a spell you need to cast sometime. You need to flip the board so that you can maintain your board state so that you can win, right? We're so dependent on our opponents not interacting with us so that we have enough time to win. We need to make space for ourselves. Cards like Cyclonic Rift are really good at that. Cards that are free counter spells are really, really good at that. Cards like Rhystic Study, I know it's not here, but Mystic Remora, that will buy us cards to keep going and playing through the game, are really important. And we do need to be playing with this. And there is an argument, and I do know it, that in like bracket 4 and above, decks start homogenizing because they're trying to play the same collection of game changers and, you know, powerful other common spells that we see at this power level. But that's the cost of playing at bracket 4, right? There's not quite anything we can do about that. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as the fun of playing bracket 4. I love bracket 4. Bracket 4 is a great place to be. The games are fast, everyone's trying their best, but we're not like stuck in CDH levels of fast mana or repetitive deck types, which your opinion will vary, of course, on that. But I mean, we should play Gifts Ungiven. That's the whole point. That's the whole dream of being in bracket 4, is being able to play these cards. So I think that comes to an end of all my suggestions. Eluge is really cool. I'm not sure this deck is quite up to bracket 4 yet. I think it needs fundamental changes to it, and I think it needs to find its place in a bracket 4 pod, right? I think having a deck at this speed, kind of hoping that your opponents don't interact with you, is going to have a bit of a hard time. But if you can find your place, you can find out how much interaction, how much stacks, how much removal you need to play, I think the deck will be pretty strong. Eluge has some pretty significant powers. I do really think being able to cast a number of low mana instant spells in a turn cycle can be very, very powerful. We just need to set up the deck to be able to. Alright, I hope this video was helpful to you, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.